Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagano, and welcome back to another unrehearsed, hastily assembled program presenting insight, opinions, and forecasts on the major issues of today. Along with everyone's favorite, John Hendrickson, I'm joined here as well with Chris Ingstad, and we are ready to roll. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine.
Good, good. Did you like that opener?
I did, yeah.
Good.
You might have overpromised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we can offer more than just words.
Well, I mean, to be fair to our listeners, this absolutely is a little bit on the fly today. We were here in the conference room, Studio 130, and
yet John still managed to grab a notepad and filled up with notes.
So John, who we talked about last time, is typically very prepared. We said, John, we're recording now. And he gets up, runs in, no notes. And it just between that time and now, he's got a whole page ready to go on his Hillsdale College notepad. So it's great. Yeah. So I'm expecting big things, John. Okay. There's a lot going on in Iowa politics right now. Presidential race heating up. Seems like with each passing week, things just get a little bit more exciting. New stuff, the twists and turns of the caucus. And I think we've touched on this before. The one thing that we've said over and over is that stay tuned because it will change. There will be ups and downs and twists and turns. So we're going to continue to cover that. John, you scribbled something just while I was saying that. And now I'm curious, like, what did I trigger in you?
I didn't know where you're going.
I didn't know where I was going either, which is why I've punted it now to you.
And so I wrote down an issue I don't know if I want to bring up unless you bring something up.
Okay, well, let's wait. We'll get that. Okay, all right. I won't put you that far on the spot. Okay, so one of the things in the presidential race, and Chris, ITR Foundation has written on this a little bit, is one of the tax policy ideas from one of the candidates.
Yes.
So, and we have talked about how we want to come back around to when these candidates, do speak out on these issues. We've talked obviously about President Trump and his record on taxes and what he's done and some of the proposals from the others. But I'm going to let you take it away and you can tell us what you got.
I think the short of it is not only in one of Vivek's books, but further on an interview just this summer, he was promoting the idea of a hefty inheritance tax, as he said, to sort of, I'm paraphrasing, to sort of level the playing field and provide opportunity and not give others a head start. And in the interview, he goes on to say, well, that's a little more like a thought experiment. First of all, I would suggest somebody who doesn't have an actual record of tax policy to run on, all we've got to consider their thought experiments. So it's a little dangerous. It's not as if somebody who has led tax legislation before and then just thinking out loud. Yeah. So, okay. So there's just maybe a first sort of red flag on that. But he says, but what is a practical thing? What would be implementable is to get rid of stepped up basis. And I will do my best not to bore anyone with like in the weeds tax policy.
But it's a basic idea that I think is very important when you're talking about things like inheritance tax.
Yeah, the short of it is when you inherit assets, for over 100 years in this country at the federal level, we've had stepped up basis. Okay, basis is what you use when you sell something for capital gains. The basis is like your starting point. Right. Okay. And where getting rid of stepped up basis. Look, if this is some sort of modern day tech IPO thing, I still don't think it's right for the government to try to take more money from anybody, but it's a little different. But in Iowa, what we have frequently is we have farm families, right? I mean, we have a lot of farm families, folks who bought, parents, if you will, bought the farmland 40, 50, 60 years ago. Those acres have seen considerable appreciation. And as we often see in Iowa, if you farm for your whole life, and of course you pay income taxes and property taxes along the way, because you're literally pouring blood, sweat, and tears into your farm, you're probably not stockpiling assets elsewhere. So that is the whole of it, right? And oftentimes they'll pass that on to their children. And if their children decide to sell it, they don't have to use the basis of what their parents paid for it again in the 1950s. Right. They can sort of step up to the value today. Because otherwise, if they inherit it and have to take the original price and then sell it at today's market, right? I mean, for a average size Iowa farm, an average quality, that's $1 million tax bill. Yeah, coming out of that.
Right. Well, and I think the point I was going to make, Chris, is like And then I want John to get.
I got more to say too.
Well, okay. It's important not just because of the tax bill that someone gets, although that's important. We want people to avoid big tax bills, is because the likely outcome or very possible outcome when someone gets that tax bill, in order to find the funds to pay the tax, you're selling farms, disposing of.
Well, yeah, I mean they'd be doing that to generate the capital gains thing anyway. But yes, it's going to lead. It's going to lead. You're forcing them into transactions. They're forcing them into things they wouldn't otherwise.
That's the better way. There.
And again, like let's be clear. There is no reason the federal government needs more money. They don't have a revenue problem. They have a spending problem. So let's not find ways, as we put in the article, to reach beyond the grave to take more money, right? And as a conservative, you should just say no to all the schemes to take more money from people, especially when it's, as he's proposing, essentially wealth redistribution. And the thing is, this Senate leadership in the U.S. Senate, so people like Schumer and Sanders, proposed this a few years ago, and Chuck Grassley fought very, very hard against it, right? Because he sees what it would do.
Right.
And here's the other thing about thought experiments in tax policy. The Trump era tax cuts and the Trump era tax code is set to expire at the end of 25. So in 2026, whoever is sitting in the Oval Office will have no choice but to put their stamp on the new tax code. Okay, so again, we're past thought experiments. We are past with whoever's sitting there is going to be driving policy, and that policy has to be really, really good. And it should favor the taxpayer, not favor government revenues. And just one last thing to be very clear. Well, stepped up basis is not set to expire, because that's been in tax code for over 100 years through Republican and Democrat administrations. But it's likely that they will renew, whoever's in office will renew at least some of the Trump era tax code. But they will also probably make some trade-offs, especially if there's a left-leaning Congress, right? If a Republican has to negotiate with them, and so taking something that's been in our tax code for 100 years and using it as a bargaining chip could be a very dangerous and very bad thing. And so we've got to nip these ideas in the bud right away.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think you touched on this. For me, one of the biggest reasons we need to look at these ideas and call it whatever name you want, proposal, just brainstorming, whatever. I want to see the tax ideas that save taxpayer money, not find new ways to collect it.
Yes.
I mean, we can get into the nitty gritty of what everybody's idea is, but is this idea one that allows government to take more dollars or keeps government from collecting more dollars?
Right.
That's a yes or no question around here. So yes, John, do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, and Chris touched on, and one of the reasons I come to is like, we've talked so much about things like inheritance tax and income tax and size and scope of the federal government.
I mean, goodness gracious, in Iowa, we have had one round after another of ways to stop the government from taking so many things. We have eliminated forms of taxes. We have reduced rates on others. And so to see the federal government come in and want to throw something back in is just totally opposite what we've been doing here.
And for heaven's sake, and I'm stealing one of the things I think John might end up saying. Yes, the federal government is in an awful position. They have spent like crazy. We went down this path the other day, John. And yes, there's a reckoning coming. But first of all, you're not going to fix it with tax increases. You're really going to make the problem worse. And before you ask the American people to kick in more, why don't you show something that shows that you're willing to actually curb spending, that this Congress is willing to address the real problem, which is they can't control themselves, and they answer every political question with more government spending. Why don't you show us and build some credibility before you come to the American people and ask them for more, because they're already giving you plenty. So,
no, I think that's absolutely right. And there's been the thing I wrote down when you asked about it was that I think there's been a large absence in the presidential race from a majority of the candidates from not laying out concrete issues. And so tax is just one issue that needs further development by, I would say, all the candidates. And we've seen bits and pieces from different candidates on what they would do. And so A number of them had said they would make the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent, which is a good idea. But Vivek has also come out with a 12% flat tax, which I think is a fairly good idea. I mean, that's lower than even what Steve Forbes had proposed when he ran, I think, in 2000. But, the question I think is, and, for tax policy, and one of the reasons why, as you said, Chris, why Iowa is doing what it's doing is that Iowa is making the tough decisions on the spending side, and that's not what the feds are doing at all. And both parties bear responsibility. In fact, I saw a headline where the national debt is now $33 trillion. And so one thing I think that's really unique about Governor Reynolds in the legislature, and especially Majority Leader Whitver, is their commitment to restrain spending. And there's so many pressures out there. I mean, some good, some bad, to basically want more money. They either want greater funding or new funding, depending on what their interest is. And Iowa has been able to hold back, and as a result, we've been able to make historic income tax cuts, phasing out the inheritance tax, and corporate rates are going down, and this is what we've been talking about on the local level as well. The locals need to start doing this as well, because as much as complicated we want to make property taxes, the problem there is spending. I mean, it goes back just like everything else, because if you don't control your spending, it's going to make that much harder to lower taxes, and the same at the federal level. And so this is why, I think what we're going to be forced into at the federal level is finding some type of a fiscal rule or a budget rule to force the federal government to balance its budget.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, John, on property taxes and local government spending, because we got to hear about this just last week, and it's one of the things I wanted to touch on today. But we did one of our regional meetings that we do this time of year with our friends at NFIB, and we were in Pella and had some really outstanding legislators there that came and visited and talked about it. But
we had some even more outstanding ITR Life podcast listeners.
Absolutely. Some of you hopefully are listening to this episode, and it was good to see you. It's kind of encouraging when you get out on the road and you find some of those folks. But
pop cans and microphone adjustments are what the listeners wanted to talk about in person. And you know what? They'd be right. Those are probably the most memorable things.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. There's certain little bits here that if you're on, you clearly were one of our early listeners. If you get some of those early bits, but yeah, it was a great event. But
the
Chris, I'm gonna kind of lean on you here on this one again too, though. But these legislators, they all got it.
They were great.
And so we had two of them in particular, which was Senate President Amy Sinclair and Senator Ken Rosenboom. Just great people, strong leaders who've been great on ITR issues, but both being former county supervisors. So they have a really unique perspective on this and shared it, I think, at this meeting.
Well, first of all, John, you talk about property taxes being a complicated issue, and it is. But Senator Sinclair did the best job I've heard of anyone in a long time of boiling it down to a fairly, I don't want to say simple because that would like demean it, but very clear and concise explanation of what works, what doesn't, the right way to do reforms.
Right.
It was great, and all from a conservative perspective. But as former supervisors, as former local government officials, they get to know other local government officials, right? And so that they also kind of know like what could actually work at the local level and what wouldn't work, and they would push different reforms of various kinds over the years. And their former local government colleagues or cohorts would come and complain about it. And I think, and this is my paraphrase on this, but I think they essentially said, like, give me a break. Like, the sky will not fall. This is not the end of the world. You can do better than that. And again, they get it. They understand the ins and outs of the issue, but they also understand just from a very foundational conservative perspective, the same thing we've been talking about. The issue is not needing more revenue. It's needing to rein in your spending. Right. And there's lots of ways that can and should be done. And unfortunately, too many local leaders, and there's also, as we've said, lots of good ones. Too many local leaders just think that any time you slow down their growth, that it's going to lead to drastic cuts. Although I think in their heart of hearts they know that's not true. They just like to play.
Well, and there's a. You talked about this. They're friends that were still in local governments that were kind of like, we need all this money, and I think what was really encouraging is to hear from these senators who were able to look past that and say, really, it's not an issue. Like I stood in your shoes and I know better, which goes all the way back to a couple issues we faced during the legislative session this last year, John, is the sky is falling argument that comes from local government. Anytime you try and make any sort of tweak to their spending or to their authority or anything, is that immediately fast forwarding to public safety and crime and pulling police off the street. And we know that those things aren't real because it doesn't end up happening. Yeah. And so these folks get it. And it's really encouraging for me to know that we have those folks that are up there at the Capitol that get it on the front line that can push back against that.
But you know what else you have? So Senator Sinclair and Senator Rosenblum, they've been through all the wars. They have been leaders. They have taken tough votes. They have done good conservative things for Iowa. But then the other two legislators on that roundtable were Representative Barb Kniff-McCullough and Representative Helena Hayes.
Yes,
and they are freshmen, right? This was just
been
their
in
first
office 1 year,
session,
not even have been elected 1 year yet.
But you can sit and listen to them, and you can hear their not just their conservative principles, but their desire to do these things, right? I mean, you could almost see them taking notes from Senators Rosenblum and Sinclair of how to approach this and how to go forward. And it was awesome. Yeah. I mean, there were 4 really conservative-minded legislators up there. There were also Chris and Matt Everson and NFIB up there also, just to sort of bookend the thing.
Right.
But folks, the Iowa legislature is made up of people like those 4. We're in a really good spot.
Yeah, I left with that sentiment too, with those other 2, and clearly they want to make changes. They want to be a part of this endeavor that we're on, and clearly studious. I mean, they both were. Not only are they trying to tell the folks that are at the meeting what they believe about the direction we should go, but they're also listening to the folks, because we had a really good conversation from the folks in attendance about their concerns about property taxes, their concerns about state spending and things that are going on around it. We could have sat there all afternoon. It was a really engaging conversation. Yeah. And it was, the way it was set up was great, because it was a sort of just everyone in the room just kicking around ideas almost and listening to these legislators. It was really just an encouraging event that I'm glad we had a chance to be a part of. Yeah. So
we've got another event. It's not a joint event. It's just us in Glenwood coming up later this week. I think 3 or 4 of us will be there. And I know the catering menu sounds good. So if nothing else, we'll have that. But hopefully we have a good discussion in Glenwood too. And John and I look forward to reporting back on that one.
So if you're anywhere around Southwest Iowa, Council Bluffs, Glenwood, all points in between, we'd love to see you come out. So it's a good plug.
Yeah.
All right. John, this is the point in the podcast episode where all the ideas that you have, it's sort of like open mic time for John. You got anything that's just eating at you?
Well, no, I was just going to make a comment that we're still seeing articles in the news about local governments saying they're going to have to cut police and fire as a result of the
I'm curious when
property
we'll
tax
see
bill that was just passed.
Yeah. I'm curious when we'll see the article say they're going to start cutting their economic development budgets and their developer.
Yeah.
Their choice, I guess.
But the other thing I want to mention, and this is a little off topic, but I think it's important, and it will be very interesting, is I believe October 3rd, the governor of Oklahoma has called a special session.
That's right. We were talking about this.
Basically, he has 3 items on the agenda. The 2 big ones are, one, he wants to have the legislature pass a bill that would basically phase out their state income tax. The Oklahoma House, I think, tried to get a income tax bill through. I don't believe it got through because there's opposition in the Senate.
Can we get a special session on October 2nd then?
And then the other thing is the other big issue was a series of budget transparency measures that he has recommended to make the budget more transparent for taxpayers in terms of state spending. So I'm going to be watching that very closely because I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens and how they handle that.
Yeah.
So
no, I think that'll be good. Every state's a little different in how they package their budget and deliver it. The information about Iowa's is generally available. You can get at it. Sometimes it's in a form that's a little, clunky, but it's out there. But if somebody's got a new idea on how to get that information out for individuals, I'd love to hear any good idea. So, well, good. Well, that's good stuff, John. I'm proud of you, despite the lack of notes and the sort of last second notice. You did well. So
I did write down one thing to talk about, but we'll have to save that for another time.
Okay. Well, we will be back again this week.
Yeah.
And we'll give you another chance to thrill and impress everyone. So good. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends and leave us a positive review. And with all of that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.